It's a Monday night. A Monday night at the interview room. We'll give a couple of minutes for YouTube to let everybody know we're here. Hello, Miss Kathy. Hello, Erica. Mama F6, Shane. Melanie, Maga, it's China. It killed me on that one. Ruby Slippers, Miss Izzy, hola, ¿qué pasó? Mucho trabajo aquí. Sophia, Rhonda, Angel P, Nikki, Amy, Jan. Hello, Karen. Mary Phillips is here. Zoe. Hi, Zoe. Jamie. I. Peterson. Welcome. Sully. Go Red Sox this year. Hello, Miss Sophia. And Lucy. Denise. Big Doodle. Dog Mom. You guys have been with me for so long. I'm so grateful. It is one party, Mary. Come on over. Kara, welcome. Dark Willow. Hi, Laura. Without our mods, we cannot do this show. We are always so grateful to each and every one of you. Tablet 2. Buddy is right behind me. Here he is. Come here, bud. Before we get started, come here. You ever try to catch a Jack Russell when they don't want to be caught? That's what's going on. Keep up the chatter. Welcome. NHL. Pens 58. What about that Canadian USA game the other day? Wow. That was a great game. And congratulations to the Canucks for winning it by 1. But boy, oh boy, was that a showstopper. I know, right, Kathy? Buddy does need his own camera. We're working on that. We're actually working on a whole new set. So that will be revealed. Ruby Slippers, great to see you tonight. It's great to see everybody tonight. So wonderful to have you. And Barb Noman, thank you so much for always being with us. And Cynthia, thank you, Cynthia. I'll tell you, we just feel so blessed to have the best audience, the most amazing thinkers. You know, we try to be ahead of the curve here on this channel, And thank you, Bullets and Bling. I've always loved that moniker. It's just awesome. It's just awesome. You know, we've got some really great people that follow us here on this channel, and we're so appreciative to each and every one of you. We are a victim-focused channel. We try to stay out of the drama. There's enough of that going on in the world where people are, you know, saying and doing things where everybody just, you know, it's out of control almost sometimes. I interviewed a guy recently, and you're right, Denise. Jack Russells are amazing dogs. And, you know, Buddy looks like Wishbone. Whenever we take him out, people are always like, hey, is that Wishbone? No, but he's the same type of dog. And then remember the pup on Frasier. Anyway, I interviewed a guy recently, and I just thought to myself, my goodness, this is nuts. And, you know, there are a lot of victims out there suffering. They're waiting for justice. And there's a lot of people sometimes that get in the way our world is functioning right now. But, yeah. So tonight, you know, I always start out remembering why we even have these conversations. And it's because of these 4 young adults who will always be, you know, in their 20s forever. And Karen and I know that very well. Obviously, you know, Ryan died September 3rd, 2003. It's been 21 years, and he was also 20 years old. So we never lose that perspective. And that's how we approach every show with these 4 victims, Ethan, Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana, first and foremost. All the other stuff is just gibberish. We want to make sure that, you know, they get justice first, just like any other victim of violent crime. There needs to be a clarity of focus, and that's why we only stick with what is released from the authorities. And tonight we're going to cover the unredacted testimony that just came out yesterday. We're going to cover the transcript. We're going to talk about, you know, what this is meaning. Obviously, the judge came forward and said, no, everything comes in, but this was part of what Ann Taylor and the defense team was trying to put together to, you know, convince a judge that he should toss all this information out. So the first, you know, pages here are really nothing, you know, spectacular. The body here tells us who's doing what and why. You know, the defense called all these witnesses, which they get an opportunity to have their own interview. And then, of course, you know, so Detective Payne was interviewed, Rylan Nowlin, Matthew Gemet, Daniel Helwig, Leah Larkin. And so, but it kicks off pretty much on page 7 with Detective Payne. So, you know me, I like to go, you know, line by line, minute by minute on this type of stuff. And that way we are all tracking this together. And, you know, we're staying with the facts, nothing, you know, earth shattering in terms of straying away. If you're new to our channel, we only ask one thing. And when I say we, Karen and I started this channel with our youngest son, Dylan, about 4 years ago. And the growth here has been just absolutely amazing. We were not anticipating taking off like we have. And now that we're here, we appreciate each and every subscriber. And that's all we ask, is that you subscribe and hit that thumbs up or whatever hits the algorithm, and then hit all so you get every video. And then the next thing we ask is that you just pass it along to your friends and family through your social media groups. That really, really helps our channel. So we appreciate that. So we've got Detective Payne on the stand, and he is sworn in here for a second already. This is the first witness. The defense, Your Honor, the defense would call Brett Payne. So Payne, just imagine him walking in the room. Miss Taylor, good morning. Good morning, ma'am. Will you state your full name, please? Brett Payne, Payne. What do you do for a living? I'm the detective corporal at Moscow PD currently. How long have you been at Moscow PD? Almost 7 years now. Prior to Moscow Police Department, did you have law enforcement experience? Yes, ma'am. What was that? I was in the Military Police Corps, the U.S. Army, for 3 years prior to coming to Moscow PD. Are you post-certified, which is Peace Officer Standard Trainings? Yes, ma'am. In the course of your responsibilities, Moscow PD, were you handling an investigation involving homicide at 1122 King Road? Yes, ma'am. What was your role? This is a really interesting answer because his role was, I was assigned lead detective after about the first 24 hours in that case. So it took him almost a day to decide who was the case agent. That's an interesting, that tells us, in my opinion, a ton that this was huge. And they needed a lot of resources here, and they weren't sure who was going to organize and put the caper together. And does that mean you had responsibility for the case and evidence? Yes, ma'am. Now, what a case agent is, okay, is that individual is responsible for putting the book together. All information flows to one source. It comes into one source, and that's the case agent. And that individual will be the point man, for lack of a better term, all the way through the trial. And then, later on, they'll give presentations post-trial. Who, what, when, where, and why. A lot of times at homicide conferences, you'll see these high-profile cases, and you'll see the investigators come out and do, a presentation. Now, what's interesting here is she starts off right away with, okay, as such, did you participate in a search for a suspect? Yes, ma'am. And when was the first time you heard Bryan Kohberger's name? So she wanted to go right to the information on the investigative genealogy. And so what she was hoping to hear him to say, almost immediately, right? But that's not what she got. He says, the first time I heard Bryan Kohberger's name was December 19th. So that's a lot. That's almost a month. That is a month past when this thing goes down, when this horrible crime goes down. So she was hoping to get a better answer than that, because she says, and what was that a result of? That was a result of investigative genetic genealogy that was being undertaken by the FBI. So right away, the feds were involved. And that's where I was saying a minute ago, after 24 hours, this guy was assigned as the lead investigator. Okay. You okay, bud? What are you eating back there? Buddy's behind me. Remember in the Griswold movie with the dog under the table? I just forget him, Clark, he's hacking up a bone. That's this nut job behind me. But it's not a bomb. We had a phone call that evening, and we were told Bryan Kohberger's name. So the feds call him. And before that, Mr. Kohberger was not on our radar. Before that, Mr. Kohberger was not on your radar? No, ma'am. Before 19th, was that the CAS team member co-located with you? Yes, ma'am. So the CAS team member is the cellular analysis team, FBI. So how long have you been co-located with you? I don't remember exactly, but it had been several weeks at that point. And was that Nicholas Balance? Yes, ma'am. What other FBI team members were co-located with you? Goodness, a lot. We had technical assistants, Maria Tyndale, SA Special Agent Jacobson, and numerous other FBI special agents that were there to assist. So the feds were on top of this right away. Right away. Yes, Snots. That was the name of the dog. You're right. Thank you for sharing that. I love that movie. Okay. And by the way, sometimes it's important to always remember, humor is a good thing. Humor is a good thing. So don't freak out if we laugh on this channel. There's nothing, it's not disrespectful. Have you reviewed videotapes? Yes, ma'am. How many hours of videotape did you think you reviewed? I don't remember a lot. I can't give you an accurate representation. In those videotapes, did you focus on any particular one that were of interest for you? Now, the great thing about this judge, Hippler, this is how Ann Taylor used to do it in Latah County. She just start throwing stuff at the wall. This is a very clear hearing for IGG, okay, investigative genetic genealogy. This is not a fishing trip. So immediately, she's come off the wall right away with, when did you first hear his name? She introduces the CAST team, the cellular analysis team, and now she wants to talk about videotapes. In those videotapes, did you focus on any particular ones that were of interest to you? Yes, ma'am. In particular, would be, are you talking about addresses how would you like for me to refer to them? How you nicknamed the cameras. Oh, so the first one was 1112 King Road. It was a surveillance camera. And this is the one I was talking about where they took it. An exterior surveillance camera on a house that was immediately to the northeast of 1122. There was some footage from a Linda Lane camera. I forgot the address on the top of my head. There was footage from the A&W, which is, down the street, which is at the corner of Main or Highway 95. There was footage from an address on Indian Hills. There was also footage from Ridge Road camera. So she opened the door and he walked right into it and said, fine, if you want to talk about video real fast. So guess what, guys and gals? All this footage we haven't seen yet. Okay. And it's coming. It's going to be here in this trial. So this is, when defense wants to go down these lanes and they open the door, the judge isn't stopping her yet until she's just so far down this lane, and he's going to stop her here in a minute. With those references in mind, keeping December 19th in mind, which of those cameras were you focusing before you learned of Bryan Kohberger's name? I would say all of them. They were all important before that. And it was later that other cameras became important. Is that right? Those were the main ones relied upon for vehicles. Notice he says for vehicles. He doesn't say for people. That doesn't mean they weren't looking for people or they don't have it. He said, in particular, I'm going to return to that in just a minute. She realized, where's he going? And so she shifts gears. I'm going to return to that in just a minute, but I want to talk to you about interviews. Now she goes to interviews. Did you interview any people in relation to the case before December 19th? Yes, ma'am. And did other officers interview people? Yes, ma'am. Were some of those people the roommates of the people at 1122 King? Yes, ma'am. Did you review other officers' work as well? Yes, ma'am. Do you have regular meetings with other officers about the status of the investigation? Yes, ma'am. Did you have any role in deciding to pursue investigative genetic genealogy? Yes, ma'am. It was a collaborative decision amongst the command team to go that route. But yes, I was part of that. Were you part of the discussion during the process of identification? Yes, ma'am. Were you aware that Ortham Laboratories began the work of the investigative genealogy? Yes, ma'am. What kind of information did you receive from Ortham Laboratories? I don't remember what was received from Ortham directly. I knew they were conducting their specific type of work. I don't remember exactly what they provided us. Did you receive documentation from them? Yes, ma'am. Do you know how many documents you received? I don't. Was it one time or was there more? I don't remember. What were you part of the discussions? Were you part of the discussions to take the work from Wortham to go to the FBI? Yes, ma'am. Why was that decision made? You notice she got in there, she wanted to talk about the interviews for a second, but she shifted it right back into IGG to kind of keep, I think, the judge, on her team flowing, which is a typical, you kind of lay it out there. Been on the stand many times where a defense attorney will take you down, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and then all of a sudden they'll shift. And, you'll be in Boston 1 minute, and now you're in San Diego. Okay. From my understanding, granted, this is my first encounter with investigative genetic genealogy. So again, as a collaborative discussion, we decided that because the Idaho State Lab and Northam had essentially exhausted their resources, this is how I understood it, that we would move to the FBI because they had more resources available to pursue this particular avenue. Do you know what more resources the FBI had? The only thing I'm privy to was that they had more databases that could be compare the sample to. That was the extent of my knowledge. So you had familiarity with the databases and the rules that apply to those? No, ma'am. I'll save those questions. So she was hoping to trip him up. He didn't fall for it. What was your communication with the FBI about the IGG? And so he basically says, I don't remember exactly the date, but the decision was made. They were telephonic advising that the process was still in the work, and they would let us know when, if anything, of interest that came about. So basically, the gist of this part of the conversation here is Idaho State Police Lab, they have a contract with Ortham. Ortham and ISP are the ones who figured out, okay, we've got male genetic DNA. Let's send it off to the feds. They have many more resources and other databases they can kick it to. And that's when this whole thing started taking off. And December 19th, they get the phone call. Did you receive documents from the FBI in relationship to IGG, i.e., he was just trying to trip her up? She was trying to trip him up? Yes. I believe after the fact, after we received Kohberger's name, we did receive documents, but I don't remember what they were. Do you know how many documents related to IGG you received from the FBI? No, ma'am. I believe as part of discovery, it was in the thousands of pages, but that's to the best of my knowledge. Thank you for that. All right. So once you have Mr. Kohberger identified, what's your understanding of what that meant to have his name? Just in relationship to the overall investigation, is that? Yes. So the only thing that was given to us was Bryan Kohberger's name. That was it. It was conveyed to us by the FBI that it was to be taken as more than a tip, that it was to be taken as no more than a tip. That was it. So once we received his name, we set about doing basically an independent verification of whether or not he was involved in this crime. That's a great answer. And that's exactly what I said. About a week ago, I said, this is probably going to end up nothing be, it's kind of like a citizen calling and say, hey, I got a tip for you. So they send off the information from the sheath, i.e. the DNA, and they get back, hey, this is going down the family tree line of this guy by the name of Kohberger. You guys may want to chase this. That's all it is. It's not complicated. It's not illegal. And that's why the judge let it all come in. They were conducting, quote, an investigation. And she didn't like that. Because look where she goes here. That was it. It was conveyed to us by the FBI that it was to be taken no more than a tip. That was it. So once we received his name, we set about doing basically an independent verification of whether or not he was involved in this crime. And then she shifts it. I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit more. But do you know why the FBI connected Bryan Kohberger to this case? So December 20th, if memory serves, we had a secondary meeting with the FBI via Teams, and they simply walked us through the family tree, how they did that. Now, I don't remember the details of all that. It was an in-depth conversation, to be honest. It was above my head, but they essentially worked their way through the family tree and arrived at a conclusion that Bryan Kohberger was a person we should look into as a tip. That's the exact extent of how they did that. Now, remember, they came up with some brothers in that genealogy. And remember that those brothers probably have the last name Kohberger. It's sealed right now. The defense and the prosecution and the judge, they're not letting us into that piece of the puzzle. Okay? But remember, they're also getting, the phone stuff starting to move. They're getting stuff coming back. And this name surfaces, and now imagine being Detective Payne, and all of a sudden you get a name. Man, that's exciting, to be honest with you. I think it's really exciting that that feeling that you get as an investigator, because now you start thinking, okay, we're gonna solve this problem maybe, but it can also be high or a low, because a lot of times you chase that and it doesn't turn out to be, the result that you wanted as well. So it's a two-edged sword. How was Bryan Kohberger, that name received as a tip, linked to the case? He wasn't until after December 19th. What item of evidence did you link Bryan Kohberger to? I'm not sure what you're asking. As far as December 19th, is that what you're referring to? Yeah. We didn't have one at that point. Why did you become interested in learning the identity of Bryan Kohberger? Now, that's a stupid question. I would have answered it because we had 4 dead people. But he answered it a little more eloquent. Not quite sure I understand your question. We were interested in anyone who would have been involved in this. The DNA from the knife sheath was obviously the one thing we had that we thought was a very strong piece of evidence in this case. So it was that particular piece that we pursued as a potential avenue of identifying a suspect. Is it your understanding the FBI work said that it was Bryan Kohberger's DNA on the sheath? That is not my understanding. Well, what's your understanding? My understanding is that the FBI concluded that Bryan Kohberger was a possible source of DNA that we should look into. They did not, to my knowledge, at any point say Bryan Kohberger's DNA is on the knife sheath. That was never conveyed to me. On December 20th, when that happened, when he's somebody you should look into, what did you do? We had already started looking into him from the previous evening, i.e. the 19th. So that day, December 20th, we began going through basically our sort of standard investigative procedures that we had been going throughout the investigation for various leads, to include basic DMV searches, NCIC offline returns, which is the National Crime Information Center returns, NCI searches, the National Crime Information Center. We have a database called TLO, which is a TransUnion. It stands for the last one, which is a credit-based search we use to find basic information. So we started doing all those things looking for information on Mr. Kohberger. And what you found is that he didn't have a criminal history. Is that correct? TLO will tell you that, as will NCIC, because NCIC will also give you, a criminal rap sheet if an individual had one. But if he's ever been fingerprinted, which he was, it'll also return information on that person who was fingerprinted. So that's kind of a loaded question for her. Because when they drop that NCIC information, which they did, it's in that thousands of pages of discovery. She also saw in there that, they could have got him that way as well. If they didn't have the hit on the DNA, but they had the NCIC hit, i.e. fingerprint, because remember, he wanted to be a police officer, and he went through, a cadet school of some point early on. So his prints were in the system. And so they started digging him up pretty quickly. Have a criminal history, is that correct? Correct. So see what she's trying to imply here is NCIC is only about criminal history. Well, yeah, that's part of it. But again, the other part is if you're a school teacher, you know what I'm talking about, or a nurse or a doctor, anybody that's been fingerprinted goes into NCIC. Okay. Talk to me about going to Pennsylvania for the trash pull. Well, I was not in Pennsylvania for the trash pull. I'll ask somebody else that later. So she tried to trick him again. All right. So after you received Bryan Kohberger's name and he hasn't been on your radar at all before, is that correct? Yes. All right. You had pursued, interviewed in surveillance vehicle video. Had you pursued evidence found inside the scene 1122? Yes, ma'am. What efforts did you make to pursue unknown male B? You have to be more specific. I don't remember exactly where unknown B came from. If I told you the lab report showed unknown male B came from a blood spot on the handrail going between the second and the first floors, does that help jog your memory? Okay, that's the first time we've heard that. So now we know that blood B is on the railing between the second and first floor. And we also know eyewitness testimony, there was a male in the house that left through the slider on the second floor. So that's really good information because now prosecution can argue, look, we had DNA on the third floor, i.e. the sheath, and for us to, choke this stuff out, i.e. send it to the lab for an unknown male still, and if the defense wants to test it, send it to the lab. They have their own labs. They can send it. But remember, at this point, the information they're working on, the suspect went out the second floor, and this is a party house. So now this is starting to make a little more sense. Wouldn't you agree? That, okay, great, there's other blood in the handrail. It's kind of like the unknown male in Suzanne's Morphew's Range Rover in the right front passenger side. Well, if the suspect killed her, Suzanne, I'm talking about Suzanne for a moment, guess what he did? He drove her car back and parked it back at her house. I mean, that's an absolute idiot. And this is going to be one of those theories, right? They're going to try to muddy the waters for the jury of saying, well, hey, guess what? There's other blood in the house. Well, no kidding. It could have been from anything or anybody. Okay. Now we know where it's at, though. Why did you not pursue that person? At that point in time, we already received Mr. Kohberger's name. And from what my understanding was, entering another DNA profile into CODIS would remove the previous one we had had from the knife sheath. Now, also there are protocols that Department of Justice and the FBI require for another CODIS hit. And so they felt, you know what, let's just chase this down, eliminate it, and that's what they were doing, was eliminating it. Because remember, that's why they went and grabbed the trash, to eliminate Bryan Kohberger. They probably would have shifted to that one or anything else. They didn't have to. And now that the defense has it and they were notified of it a year ago, they could have sent it to the lab all that time on their own and had it identified. And then they could have chased it down. They have defense investigators. They have 2 of them, retired cops out of Riverside PD in San Diego, or excuse me, in Riverside, California. They know what to do. They can do that. Nothing preventing the defense from conducting their own defense investigation. Do it all the time. So if memory serves, the discussion was we'll hold off. We'll stay with the one from the knife sheath. If we need to, we can address the unknown male B at a later time. Boom. Just what I said. You don't want to go down rabbit holes until you know that the rabbit you have is not the one that was living in that hole at the time. I want to make sure I understand your testimony, as if this is, the dramatic, roll in the drums, bring in the parade. Miss Taylor has a question. I want to make sure I understand your testimony. Were you not aware of unknown male B until after December 19th, when you knew Bryan Kohberger's name? No, ma'am. I was aware of that before. Yes. How about unknown male D? Again, you're going to have to be more specific. If I told you unknown male D came from a lab report from a sample of blood on some gloves, so it looks like there's plural here, outside the house, does that refresh your memory? Yes, ma'am, it does. You aware of that too? Yes, ma'am. I want to back up and talk about the affidavits. I think you told me in a particular hearing that you were the person who wrote Exhibit A, or the affidavit in support of the search warrants, when it came to looking for things about Bryan Kohberger. So what she's trying to do is lay a foundation for a Franks hearing instead of focusing on the IGG. And I think this is where the judge saw right through her now that this has been released. And you can see right here where she asked that question. If I told you an unknown male D came from a lab report from a sample of blood on some gloves, that's plural. Okay. So maybe there is more than one. Nancy Gray said she dropped one while she was out there. Maybe they picked that one up too. And the one I found, and pointed out to them, I know they got that one. Maybe there's more. We don't know. I want to back up and talk about the affidavits. I understand. Yes, ma'am. And the affidavit when you began was that on December 23rd to get records, right? So again, she's going out of the scope of what this hearing is about. All she does now is she throws it on the wall. Did you interview people? Yeah. Did you do this? Did you see videos? Yeah. Did you do this? Yes. Blah, 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 gloves, etc. So all she's doing is she's on a fishing trip. And the judge saw right through that. And she goes, the first warrant that applies to Bryan Kohberger, I believe it was December 23rd. When did you begin writing that? I began writing the affidavit long before that. It was a running affidavit because at the beginning of it, there was a walk through the crime scene. There's numerous things. There was a living document, i.e., he started the search warrant, meaning, putting information in, and that information became a fluid event. I'm going to sneeze. Hang on. Sorry. Okay. So we're adding information to it. I'd say the document started, I don't know, can't give you an exact date, even before we knew Mr. Kohberger's name. Help me understand what parts were added after you knew Mr. Kohberger's name. Well, to walk down the line best I can. So obviously there's an initial component, which is the crime scene, the testimony from the roommates. And then after that, it shifts to, I believe, the first mention, the first component was that Bryan Kohberger was pulled over by Corporal Duke on a traffic stop. He was also contacted by WSU police. His vehicle was run by WSU police officers. Then after that, we concluded trying to walk down through the things without it in front of me. Then we included the vehicle information that was about the white Elantra. And after that, we included his residence, that we had hits, LPRs, which is license plate readers, or his vehicle had been seen on LPRs between Moscow and Pullman, in Pennsylvania. So they have this guy on a lot of video data. They've got that vehicle. When it says LPRs, that's license plate readers. There's a couple systems out there. There's toll systems, there's flock systems, there's all kinds of stuff out there. And so they had hits on all of this stuff, on his car, on his license plate. So they were starting to narrow in that this guy is moving from one place to the other. So she's throwing it at the wall and seeing what's going to go there. Let's go back to the time before you started adding the traffic stop. That affidavit contains some information that you gained from other officers, right? Not uncommon, happens all the time. And then you write large parts of the affidavit. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. I took a lot of language from experts and other officers and agents. That's correct. Are you aware? Even some cases, you'll get more experienced investigators that will write the affidavit because of their experience level, or if they're going to be assigned to, work at the crime scene and manage the crime scene, they'll write the affidavit to the crime scene, to get in there and search. And as the lead detective, this is not uncommon. Other officers, FBI, you're gaining information, and all you're doing is telling the judge, and we went over this the other day, Your Honor, this isn't everything. We're just looking for probable cause to get to that guy and get a buccal swab. That was the goal here, to get to Bryan Kohberger, get a buccal swab, and see where it goes. Okay, and that's essentially what they did. I mean, they pulled the trash. They had the cops in Pennsylvania, and they're putting that's all in here. Excuse me. That's all in here. Okay. And are you aware that you probably know, because Brian Balance was co-located with you, and he's the FBI CAS team guy. Did the two of you continually work on language to satisfy what the prosecutor wanted to see for probable cause? Yes, ma'am. Did you and Nicholas Balance produce a map to show a possible route of travel for your suspect? Yes, ma'am. She's not saying my client. And Your Honor, I'm at defendants 1A. And can either of you put up here and approach the court in the map? Can I approach, basically, blah, blah, blah. And the judge says, let me see what you're doing. Just in housekeeping, you had mentioned you stipulated to the mission of sounds like a large chunk of records, 1,000 pages. Yes, Your Honor, it's a stack of exhibits that came behind the amended Frank's motion from the defense. Okay. So you want me to search, though, to find this stuff? You want me to rely on? I don't. I'll be happy to give you a copy. No, I don't mean that. So the judge is not happy with her because he laid it out in the beginning. I'm not playing games here, and you're not going to just keep saying stuff and not pointing me to the exhibit of where it's at. Okay. As you know, I entered in order this case that I'm not going to scour the record to find things that support your claims in this case, like the last judge. You have to cite them in particularity. And so I get concerned when I'm told I'm going to get a large document to be admitted that doesn't sound like it's going to be the focus of the actual hearing. He's hinting. Stop fishing. Stop playing games. Okay. Well, Your Honor, I do have quite a few more questions for this detective. I'm trying to be mindful of my role here as far as Frank's and his work in IGG. I plan to do what I plan to do was argue from the exhibits, identifying them for the court, and hand the court my copy. So I don't expect the court to thumb through all the D1s and D2s, defensive ones and defense twos. I just didn't bring another 1,000 pages with me. I understand. My concern wasn't so much what I had in front of me as actual paper. My concern is littering the record with things that are not referred to. If you're going to reference the specific documents in there, that's fine, but don't expect me to go looking for things you don't refer to. Oh, I absolutely understand that, Your Honor. Those were all put in so the counsel would be advised. She's a good defense attorney. I got to give it to her. because she's really good at just, throwing in bananas and seeds and, powder and all this other stuff and making a smoothie and then saying, it's a smoothie. Okay. And nobody asked, what kind of smoothie? The last judge wasn't asking what kind of smoothie. And Hippler's going, are you making a smoothie? And if so, why are you making a smoothie? Because I told you, you need to start pointing out the ingredients as you pour them in. And then you need to justify how that connects to the IgG. Just don't mix it all together and then expect me to somehow pull out of the magic hat, making sense of what you're doing. I love this judge already. And if the family's listening, you guys are in really good hands with Hippler. You are going to get an amazing fair trial with this judge. This is not his first rodeo. And you know what? She's doing her job, and she's just throwing stuff as fast as she can. But I'm actually impressed with the judge here. So put your seatbelts on. Ms. Taylor, absolutely, I understand that, Your Honor. I don't expect the court to read my mind. Thank you for that, Detective. She shifts right back to the detective. Detective, I'm going to attempt to put this map up here. Is that the map you and Nicholas Balance came up with to help you with probable cause? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm going to leave that there just for a minute. I'm going to ask you some other questions. So basically what the judge did is he put the toll arm down and the train came by. And she shifted quickly because she knew, I don't think the judge is going to let me go here, but she tries it anyway. I want to back up to the part of the first affidavit that's asking about the AT&T records. Now remember, this hearing is about genealogy. What does the AT&T records have to do with genealogy? Okay. This is, I think the judges, we're going to see him get frustrated. I read ahead of this the other day and yesterday, and he's not going to put up with it, man. Hang on for a minute. I think I got a sound effect for that. Whoop. There it is. And this AT&T record, is that the first set, 48 hours of AT&T records? Yes, ma'am, I believe so. And are these AT&T records related to phone and Mr. Kohberger had? Yes, ma'am. All right. And so in doing this affidavit, you have this working document. It's a living document. And I'm going to start with DM. If I say DM, do you know who I'm talking about? Yes, ma'am, I do. And she is one of the roommates. Is that right? The court, we're sealed. You can use the name. Miss Taylor, I can use the name, trying to get a habit? Miss Taylor, who is she? She was one of the surviving roommates. And how many times was blank interviewed by law enforcement at the time you wrote this December 23 report? If memory serves, it was 4, I think, 3 or 4. In the affidavit, you wrote a statement that she had heard Kaylee go upstairs, yell, someone's here, and run back downstairs. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And you used the word she thought she heard. Do you remember that? Miss Jenkins, Your Honor, I'm going to object. I'm objecting based on the scope of what this testimony is supposed to be. My understanding was it was limited solely to the issue of Franks and IgG. Again, she's fishing. And the prosecution said, Your Honor, reel us in. Put the guardrail down again. Okay, just for a minute. The court, I was just about to ask the question. I don't recall the statements of DM being a subject of a motion to suppress separate from the Franks issue. Am I correct about that? He's being sarcastic to Miss Taylor. Miss Taylor, that is correct, Your Honor. Okay, so we're not at a Franks hearing on that issue. The only issue we're here at in the Franks hearing is on the IgG. All right, Miss Taylor, all right. Well, let me rephrase. Let me start from a different place. I'll sustain the objection. Let's go to the part of your affidavit for December 23rd, AT&T 1. the part where you put in things particular to Bryan Kohberger. You put that in affidavit, a traffic stop, I believe, from August in Moscow, Idaho. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. The traffic stop, was that on your radar before December 19th when you learned of Bryan Kohberger? No, ma'am. The next thing you relied on was a traffic stop at WSU. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. Was that traffic stop on your radar before you knew Bryan Kohberger's name on the 19th? No, ma'am. You put in information about front license plate being missing from Pennsylvania cars. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. The 1122 video did not show enough of the vehicle that you could see whether it had a front license plate. Is that right? That sounds correct, yes. So it was after you learned of Bryan Kohberger's name that became part of your affidavit. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. Let's talk about the vehicle identification for a moment before I run back down through the rest of your affidavit after Bryan was identified. When you worked with Special Agent Emil to identify a vehicle, was there more than one vehicle he identified? You see what she's trying to do here? All she's trying to do is muddy the water to the jury in the court of public opinion right now. The fact that this has been released and the fact that she keeps adding all this stuff, AT&T, now we're talking about the vehicle, we're talking about what DM may have said. All she's trying to do is create confusion around the gag order. I have said this from the very beginning about this defense attorney. And quite frankly, I think the judge is somebody needs to, just absolutely stop this. And because look here, would you agree that's the most comfortable with the year? I don't believe there was, in memory serves, it was just the Hyundai Elantra. Would you agree that the most comfortable of the year is 2011? Objection, Your Honor, for the same reason. I don't understand the scope related to IGG. Ms. Taylor, Your Honor, I'm going to ask for a little leeway on this one. Now, that's what she would do with Judge. I think it was clear I think it will be clear in about two more questions. If it is a sealed proceeding, I'm arguing it at the Franks. I don't want to pollute the record, so approach. So what he does is he calls for a sidebar. And he asks all the attorneys to come up, and here's what they do. Ms. Taylor, they look for 2011 to 2013. It was their bolo. Be on the lookout. It was after Bryan was identified by IGG that they expanded the search. The court, that relates to what? Ms. Taylor, I'm going to relate to Franks, but it has to do with IGG and when they identified him. I have about two more questions along this line. You have separate Franks motion regarding the scope of the car search? Absolutely. That we're not here for today. We're here for the IGG. I get the idea that if the IGG is suppressed, the warrants based on IGG is suppressed. That affects a lot of other things, right? Fruit of the poisonous tree is what it's called. Everything starts falling. But I don't think you need to get into the evidence of that at this point because it's part of a Franks. There's a separate Franks motion on that. There absolutely is. The next question I'm going to get into the affidavit after the IGG was the police in Pullman running the car. He had his laid out at the affidavit in the IGG without stating it. So I'm doing the IGG part with him now. This is a sales job by Ann Taylor to the court. That car is a different year than the one the Bolo's for. He just testified that it was an Elantra. And the FBI said it's between a 2011 and 2016. That was the initial information this detective had. Nothing wrong with that. He got the model, the Hyundai right, and he got the freaking model right. Okay, so she wants to narrow it down with, yeah, but it's not the exact year. Okay, you say tomato, I say tomato. That's as far I'm going to with this car hearing. Counsel, can you see the judge there leaning his head going, counsel, i.e., seriously? I don't understand what this has to do with IGG. It's part of a Franks hearing related to vehicle identification. I understand her timeline, but I think that point has already been made. Miss Taylor, this was when I was allowed to explore this witness since he's already here and we've paid for him to come here. So she knew she was going to drift and go in any direction she wanted because this is the defense witness. She paid for him to come down, i.e. there's, his salary or whatever it's going to, whatever it was, his transportation, maybe the hotel, whatever. They came out of the defense budget. Okay. The court, yeah. But I didn't open up everything to Franks because we couldn't get into all other things. I understand we could get into the entirety of Franks on IGG, which is why I allowed it. And that's what we're going to stick to today. IGG flows. It makes everything. The court. Well, I'm not suggesting we get into other Franks issues that sprung in part from IGG because those are separate, based, right? And so I think we need to talk about the specific IGG stuff today in terms of Franks, i.e., was he being truthful? Was he being honest? Is his credibility, which will be judged by the court? Okay. Will the judge say, you know what? I think this guy's lying. And if he is lying, let's have a Franks hearing. Okay. And you'll notice in the judge's ruling, he said, no, we're good. Okay. And isn't it interesting that she screamed, shout, from all the rooftops saying, well, let's unseal this thing. And so everybody can read it. So now we're reading it. We see that she was on a fishing trip. Miss Taylor, to suppress which I'm not following. She didn't get her way. She goes, I'm sorry. I'm not following. I'm sorry. There are motions to suppress that are not Franks related. Right. I'm not going there. That's evidence we can put on today, but I thought we're going to do that later. Absolutely. The court. There are various Franks motions, one of which is to suppress. One of the Franks motions is that there was a Franks violation, but by not informing the magistrate of using IGG in violations as you allege them in obtaining the IGG. Remember, her whole argument was that the lower court or the first superior court judge who signed the search warrants was not told about the totality of the evidence at the point for two reasons. One, they didn't have it, and two, they didn't have to. They told her there was enough. They gave her enough information in that original affidavit that said the DNA came back to this guy, and we want to go get him, and we want to go get his, buccal swab. And if she wanted to argue even further, then I guess the officer Payne could have put in his affidavit. And by the way, there's two other blood samples, okay, which could lead to two other potential suspects. But we know we got this one now. So he could have inferred to the court 3 suspects. And then Ann Taylor would have been arguing those other 2, sods, some other dudes, okay, which is a defense tactic, and you got to love them. That's the issue we're going to today in terms of evidence, and I want to stick to that. So getting into the car, which is separate, which I understand your argument is the IGG led them to expand the search of cars, but that's not the Franks issue itself. The Franks issue itself on IGG is the IGG. It's limited to that. All right. The court, I'm going to sustain the objection. Taylor, all the things in the warrant that became particular to Bryan Kohberger were not on your radar before you learned his identity through IGG. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And you elected not to put the IGG information in your probable cause affidavit. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. What led to that decision? The decision was a collaborative decision. We made the decision in an effort to independently verify the information that was provided to us as a tip from the FBI in much the same way we would any other tip in law enforcement. So it was not in any way meant to obfuscate or sort of information. It was simply, can we validate Mr. Kohberger's involvement in this incident, or can we not? That was it. What he's saying is we have an obligation to investigate information. Remember, a great investigator only investigates information. They don't investigate people. Names don't mean anything. If the information takes you to a name, that's the information you follow. And if it substantiates itself through investigation and or exculpatory evidence, meaning you're always looking, to remove that name if possible or that person, that's the job. And that's what he's saying here. Line 10, in this incident, or can we not? i.e., is he in the circle or is he out of the circle? That's what this officer was saying, this detective was saying. Okay. Try not to have a biased stance. Okay, I'll try. Okay. I've worked 300 murders and I only lost one in trial. So I'll do my best. I'll do my darndest. Okay. So any group of effort, yes, ma'am. Given the limitation at this point, I think that's all my questions. So she knew, being unbiased, it didn't work. She was done. And so now Ms. Jenkins goes in there, doesn't really say anything, cross-examination. She did a great job. The judge comes back and says later on, no, okay, done, etc. This all comes in. So let me get to the next witness. It's going to be Renee Nowlin. She's the lab in Idaho State Police lab. She basically lays out, hey, this is how we got it. This is how we collected it. And this is what we did. And they actually call it FIG, Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy. She talks about the type of databases that it can be added into. She talks about what they did with it, i.e. the best practices, what are the associations that are involved in here, et cetera. Okay. There are organizations that come up for standards in different fields. There are protocols that these labs have to follow, and there are protocols that they have to maintain those analytical methods and quality of systems, means those protocols have to be followed, and that her laboratory is an accredited laboratory. That's where all of this stuff is. That accreditation is important because that accreditation gives you validation to send it to another accredited lab like Quantico, Virginia, and the FBI. Because our laboratory is particular in the National DNX Index System, it's commonly referred to as CODIS, which stands for Combined DNA Index System. We are subject to additional standards set forth by the FBI because they manage that database. So that's what I was talking about. There are sets. Okay, there are some labs or some DNA that's not admissible into CODIS because it wasn't collected properly. It doesn't point to a particular individual. Okay? Or doesn't, they don't have any focus as to where the evidence came from. So this individual is telling us, that no, we hit all the boxes, we checked all the boxes, okay, and it was sent. Those standards are known as Q&A standards. There are validation studies, chemistry, and we're going to hear her at length in the trial coming up. They followed the rules on this one. They followed the rules. Do you have any administrative responsibilities, CODIS? Not recently. Okay, what kind of profile is used? It's my understanding the question correctly, there's different types of DNA profiles. And what goes into CODIS is known as STR profile, or short tandem repeat, STR. The kind of information is a short tandem repeat, or STR. Can I give a brief explanation about DNA? Sure. So DNA is a substance that's found in the cells of our body. It acts as a blueprint. It tells our bodies what form to take and how to function. Between individuals, it is over 99% the same. That is why we all have the same basic structure, and our bodies function in basically the same way. In forensics and in STRs, we are targeting the less than 1% that is unique to an individual. So they're not going after the 99%, they're going after the 1%, okay? with the exception of identical twins. And so areas of DNA that vary widely between individuals don't code for anything typically. So it doesn't tell us anything about a person. When I look at an STR profile, the 1%, I can tell you if that person is genetically male or genetically female, and that's all. Now, that's important to know, okay? Because those, that's what DNA tells us. Bone structure tells us that as well, okay? Male bone, hip bones and female hip bones are different. And so are STR profiles. They're genetically female and genetically male. That's it. There's only two in the world forever. Do you know what SNP profile is? I do. What is that? An SNP profile is a singular nucleotide polymorphism. So you're looking at a single nucleotide, whereas the STR is a series of repeating nucleotides. A specific type of a specific repeat that we're looking for. An SMP then, is that a closer look at a person's genome? I'd like to state that I'm not an expert in SMPs. I'm not qualified in SMP technology and have not ever been qualified in the SMP technology. So what she's trying to get this lab technician to tell her is information that the FBI probably provided about the SMPs. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Francine Bardot come on here and give us another education about DNA. And if you want to see that education that she's given us in the past, look up her video in my playlist down there. Francine is world renowned, and she actually created the Bardot method, which is, a method of extracting DNA from any type of item. I mean, she's pulled DNA off of rocks, if you can believe that. Okay. And, bullet casings, etc. I love Francine. She's amazing. She's smart. She's world renowned, etc. So again, the court shuts her down. Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. This witness is not disclosing an expert, and she just testifies she's not an expert in SMP. I appreciate that with respect to her answer, and I will take that into account in the event the defense intends to rely on that testimony. I took it as sort of a background about her general knowledge. I'll allow it for now. I'm not taking it as expert testimony about that SMP beyond the basic understanding of what SNP is. Thank you. Do you remember my question? Yes. So basically, she tries to go down there, that lane, correct, 4 indexes, yes, blah, blah, blah. So I understand you use DNA to get a STR, and only under certain circumstances can you use CODIS. Do I understand that correct? Correct. Okay, outside of CODIS, and I understand what that does, if you create a DNA profile of somebody, is that a separate thing you do in your lab, even if you're not going to run them through CODIS? Yes. When we receive the items of evidence or samples from known individuals, we generate a DNA profile from those. Notice she said known individuals. That's critical to know, known individuals. Did you become involved in the homicide in 2022, involved in the manager of the laboratory of Meridian? Involved as a manager of the laboratory of Meridian? I haven't actually done any work on the evidence in the case or issued any reports. All right. Is it fair to say you did not go to the residence then? Correct. As the lab manager, do you understand about what evidence has come into the lab from that case? There was a lot of evidence submitted. I have a general knowledge of items that have come in, but I could not provide a detailed list of off the top of my head. That's okay. I won't ask you to. Thank you. As a lab manager, are you aware of different bits of testing that were done related to this case? In general, yes. Are you aware of a profile called unknown male A? Yes. Where did that come from? To my recollection, unknown male A came from a swab taken from a knife sheath that was submitted by Moscow Police Department. Are you aware of unknown male B? I believe that was another sample from hearing the previous testimony that was from in the house. I would only want you to testify from your own basic knowledge. From my own memory, I don't recall exactly where B was from. Fair enough. Thank you for your clarity. Are you aware of the investigative genetic genealogy or forensic investigative genetic genealogy was used in this case? Yes. What was your role in that? My role specific in this case, facilitating the signing of Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, making sure all parties received it and had signed it, i.e. chain of custody. So she's got a very limited role in this whole thing. She's the lab manager. Okay. Those parties being the police agency, the prosecuting attorneys, as well as members of the ISP management team, Idaho State Police. And then when the preliminary reports were received, my job was to look over it, ensure that it had all the required pieces in the report, and then authorize payment of the invoice for that testing. So basically, somebody else did the work, is what this comes down to for her. They put her up there just to see what they could dig out of her, and because they didn't get anything. Okay, so let's go to the next one. All right, page 84. So, I mean, all this part is they're just talking about who paid what and why. I'll show you a copy of the MOU. Will that help? Yes. Okay, great. Fine. Does that refresh your memory? Yeah. Whether the Department of Justice interim policy applied, it does say in the first paragraph that it did apply. So I've got thousands of filings. I have to go date by date to find things. Again, the judge is not having this. DOJ's interim policy of forensic genealogy analysis, blah, blah, blah. I believe it's section 7, investigative caution, that section. Let me ask you this question. Are you familiar with the provisions in that policy that say if there's a prosecution case, if somebody is arrested and there's a prosecution case, you notice it says if somebody is arrested, she knows what the rules are. All items in the forensic investigative genealogy should be preserved for court purposes. I believe that is the part of it. I don't think it's a section 7. It might be, but I believe it's part of preserving. Of course, everybody knows you have to preserve it. Of course you do. But once you test it, it doesn't mean there is always going to be enough. Okay? And that's why if you've got gloves and you're the defense and you want to test something, then test it. And if they use up the sample in that glove in the defense labs, then guess what? Everybody is on the same page. Okay? They're on the same page. We received a preliminary report in other cases, anything our laboratory receives. So basically, unfortunately, the judge is saying, look, this is a Frank's hearing. Did the officers, did they do anything wrong? I.e. lied to the lower court? And now she's talking about where it went to, Orthram, who did what, snaps. And now she, in the middle of this, gets to the trash pull. A trash pull. I recall receiving evidence from a trash pull. What role did you have in deciding anything about the trash pull? Nothing about the trash pull occurring. I do recall there being a brief. I can't remember if it was a phone meeting or a video meeting, and just being asked in general, what items someone's trash are good for DNA? Did you give advice? I don't know if it was me specifically or another member of our DNA unit. But we did offer suggestions on items that could be good for DNA. They didn't even know in that trash pull. They didn't even know. They had a name, a guy named Bryan Kohberger. They had a car on a Elantra. They had a Bryan Kohberger connected to the car at the time, a white Elantra. They had all of this LPR data. They see this white Elantra in the area. Okay. They're starting to receive, I'm sure, information coming in from the phone pings and all this other stuff. But again, we get down to line 17. The discussion was a person of interest had been developed and to analyze the items from the trash to determine if they could be inclusive of the DNA profile that was developed from the knife sheath, unknown male A. Now, this is important because they were calling it unknown male A. And on the knife sheath, they didn't know it belonged to Bryan Kohberger. They did not know. They suspected, remember the old Cheech and Chong where the cop walks up and the window goes down and the smoke comes out and he goes, "You smoking marijuana here?" Right? That's what's going on here. You got smoke and you got, Cheech looking up at you going, maybe. So this is a maybe moment. So December 28th, they pull the trash. So you're looking for a male profile, correct? All right. Did you find a male profile? I didn't perform the actual testing, but yes, there was a male profile developed. How many? I don't know. Do you know anything about either male profile or any of them? I believe one of the male profiles designated as E was determined that could be a biological parent or child of the profile from the knife sheath. Oh, interesting. Are you aware that Bryan Kohberger's DNA was in the trash? I was not aware. Did you become aware? I became aware later. We didn't have his name at that time. So they pulled Bryan Kohberger's DNA out of the trash as well. Okay. You didn't know his name on December 28th? No, I didn't. Okay, on the 28th, were you aware that male E, but another male profile had been identified from the trash pull? I knew there were some mixtures of DNA that were also included. Of the mixtures, did it have a male DNA profile? I believe it did. This is also important. Now they got male, female, because that's what a mixture is. So Anne's being slick here. We'll find out. Anne's being slick here. Okay? She's trying to trip her up and confuse the issue. And there's a minor female and a major male. That's my understanding. But a DNA profile was made for that mixture. Is that right? Yes. And there's a minor female and a major male. So they have male and female. Well, that's not looking good for Bryan Kohberger on that mystery DNA. Ann Taylor went down that road. She opened the door and the judge let her run with it. Everybody see that? And there's a minor female and a major male. That's my understanding. And you could, by eye, look at that and tell that's Bryan Kohberger's, couldn't you, if you wanted to? If I wanted to, I could probably look. I did not, i.e. the reports. And you could still do that today if you wanted to. If there's a request to do the comparison again, we don't do a visual comparison evidence to evidence. Our procedures don't allow us to do that for probative comparisons. I need you to help me understand that a little bit. I'm having that question because I understand there was an unknown male B found on lab item 30. Do you know what I'm talking about? No. Okay, well, I understand that there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. Are you familiar with that? I am familiar with that. And that was compared to the DNA on the knife sheath. Is that correct? Yes. And that was found to be excludable. Am I using the word right? It was exclusion, correct. So you compared something that was taken from somebody to an item of evidence. Is that right? Okay, so somebody was smoking at the crime scene. That cigarette butt was picked up. That's what they're saying here. And they compared it to Kohberger's DNA on the sheath. And as a result of that, I understand there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. So somebody, remember we always talk about cross-contamination, what goes in, what comes out. Whatever goes in stays. It sounds like somebody was smoking a cigarette and they flicked the butt. And somebody, one of the crime scene analysts, found it, collected it, and they compared it against the DNA on the knife sheath, right here, line 4. And that was compared to the DNA on the knife sheath. Is that correct? Is that right? Yes. And that was found to be excludable. So it's kind of like, I had a case one time, one of the guys put a big gulp. It was a taxi cab, and the victim had been shot. The cab driver had been shot from the back seat, and he was deceased in the front seat. So the whole cab was a crime scene. And when we got it back, after, we had examined it, we took it to a safe location, etc., and we hit it with a bunch of chemicals. And there was this ring on the top of the cab. And one of the lab folks looks over at me and goes, "Hey, Mac, it looks like, some kind of cup ring, some soda ring or something like that." And so we spent a lot of time measuring, seeing what kind of cups and et cetera. And we came up with the conclusion that, hey, this could have been like a big gulp or something like that from a 7-Eleven, because there was a 7-Eleven nearby. And we were thinking, okay, well, man, that's pretty gutsy for the suspect to, have a big gulp, shoot the cab driver, have a big gulp, put it on top of the car. So we're putting it out in the briefing that, hey, we're looking, I need to figure out where, this big gulp could have come from. Can somebody go to 7-Eleven, interview the clerk, et cetera, see if we got any video? Guy puts his hand up and he says, "That's mine." I was like, what? Yeah, I'm sorry, Mac. I accidentally put my big gulp on top of the car. Well, how the heck do you do that? Anyway, later on we laughed about it. And this is the same situation. Never smoke. Don't touch any of the lights. If the heat's at 100 degrees, don't touch it, because all those variables, you have to document every single variable within a crime scene. You never want to go into that crime scene and add something like this, because then you'll give a defense attorney an opportunity to run down this lane. And that's what's going on here. So they talk about the trash pull, the water bottles from a person of interest. This tissue is from a sibling. This Q-tip is from a parent. We didn't have that information. It was just, here's some items from a trash pull. And one of those items you took and developed Male E. I did not, but yes, the laboratory did. So she's trying to get her to, as the lab manager, to make a commitment. And it wasn't her job. Okay, so we're going to hear from the lab technician that actually did this as we get down into the trial here. There was a paternity statistical calculation, but they were both single source profiles, meaning only one individual. And there's another male profile. There was a mixture, to my knowledge, meaning more than one person's DNA present on that item. Again, only one male, though. Is that right? There was a mixture of items of evidence. So I don't know what you want me to explain the process. the first step is determining, contribution factors. Then our laboratory uses a software program to help break out the components of the mixture. Males have an X and a Y chromosome. Females have only X. So if there's an X and a Y present, it could only be one male. It could be two males. It could be male and a female. Without comparing to known reference samples, I can't say that for sure. I haven't seen the profile. Okay, did you tell me, though, on that sample, I'm talking about 95.91, that was a male and a female? I believe that. I don't know if it was designated as that in the laboratory report. Anyway, she's just going down this lane about the trash, and she was going to try to make a connection back to the unknown, and it didn't work. That's the bottom line here on this one. Now, this is the important stuff. Now, I want to talk to you about what we're talking about. You say the sheath. You're familiar with what happened in the sheath for swabbing. Is that right? I've seen the sheath, and I know how our laboratory performs swabbing of evidence, but I did not swab that item of evidence, nor did I see it being swabbed. As I understand it, though, you've read the lab notes. So she's questioning her about somebody else's work by reading their report. At one point, I believe I did read the notes. I think it was, I was asked a question and the analyst was out of town or something. Now, this is a tactical move by the defense to put the lab manager on to talk about the work of her employees. Okay? That's like asking a flight attendant, so tell us what the captain did, when the flaps went down. And the flight attendant goes, well, I have to read the report, and I'll tell you what he said in his report. That's what's happening. Okay? That's what's happening. I understand the lab report says single source of knife sheath. Is that correct? Correct. Does that mean it's only one person in that area? Yes. That was detected through our testing. Tell me where you think that sheath was swabbed for purposes of DNA collection. I believe the analyst swab, there's kind of a snap or a button that was at the top of the snap, and that's the area that was swabbed. There were also areas on it sampled as well. So there's multiple swabs. For the purpose of unknown male A that you're telling us later came back to Bryan Kohberger. That's the only place I want to talk about right now. Are we on the top of the button, the outside, or the inside, the socket portion of the button? I know on the top. So that is the top of the button where you push that button. That's where they get the swab, according to this testimony. I don't recall if she swabbed the underside or not. I'll have to look at her notes again. Do you know if that sheath was part or preserved for fingerprinting? The swabbing was done first. That's our laboratory standard order of processing. If DNA is needed in fingerprints, they will work together. Essentially, fingerprints will say we can see some possible ridge detail. So if you can avoid this area after DNA says we want to swab this, and they come to a decision of what would be best suited for this item of evidence to determine where the swab, so the swabbing takes place first. I think I don't have any other questions right now. Thank you. So she asked about, well, is this Bryan Kohberger's? And she's not liking the answer she's getting. So she shuts it down. She shuts it down. And so I think the judge is playing this 100% correctly. And they end up taking a break. They come back, and of course, they don't get anything. The defense didn't get anything. That said, I am excited to see that Judge Hippler was on top of this. This is now being, it's released into the public. It's not redacted. I'll put into the link in the description where you guys can find the rest of these pages, and the rest is the same stuff. And Taylor's doing her job. She's trying to trip up anybody she can. She's not bringing the main witnesses on. This was just to see if she could get the judge to have a Frank's hearing, i.e., was the first judge, the lower judge, when they first issued the search warrants, were they deceived? And did the officers intentionally do it? So the answer here, according to Judge Hippler, was no. They were not deceived, and all of this evidence will come in. And therefore, now there's a playing field that's clearly, designated ahead. If you think of a baseball game, the guys with the rakes have come out and they've smoothed the dirt. And now everybody can say, okay, play ball. And I think there's going to be some discussions. If I was the defense and the death penalty was on the table, I would be running to the prosecution and saying, look, can we at least have a conversation about this? And the prosecution behind the scenes would say, yeah, sure, tell us if your guy did it, i.e., and then we'll discuss why and who, and we'll take the death penalty off the table. But that will be also after discussions with the families. There are 4 families here that will be in on those discussions. So anyway, you guys, I appreciate you being here tonight. Please hit that thumbs up button. Greatly appreciate it. And thank you for your patience. So we'll see you on Sunday. Got another great show ahead for you. All right. Aloha. Be kind and considerate to one another, and always be praying for these families. They deserve justice. And also, to be fair, like that earlier comment, pray for Bryan's family too. They did not do this. If Bryan allegedly is our suspect, which DNA apparently points to him, you'd have to go to Mars to find somebody else, and you won't even find him up there, then they're suffering too. And we need to be conscientious about that. All right, guys. Aloha.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a